All right, today is Tuesday, the 16th of February. As we start, if you hadn't heard this already, there is a graduation fair on next Wednesday and next Thursday if you want to go. And that's for you if you're planning on walking in the procession. You can order your cap and gown and everything else. If you are planning on graduating in May, I believe you have to go over to Student Services and you have to literally apply for graduation. You have to do that by like March 1st. Did you all hear that? All right, so those of you who are planning on graduating, all right. All right, that's enough to start. Okay, so we're in the middle of section 2 or part 2 of our book. So far, we've gone over lesson 7, accessing DOM elements using JavaScript and jQuery objects. And we've gone over chapter 8, navigating and manipulating jQuery objects and DOM objects. The plan today is to go over chapter 9, applying JavaScript and jQuery events for richly interactive websites. And on Thursday to go over chapter 10, dynamically accessing and manipulating web pages with jQuery and JavaScript, and working with window browser and other non-page stuff. All right. And then what we're going to do a week from today, it's funny because one of the students yesterday, Luke knows who he is, Jory. He says, oh, what are we going to do next week? Are we going to make a game? And I said, yes. And it really shut him up because he didn't know what to say after that. All right. So it's a little crude right now. It'll get better, but that's the game we're going to make. It's Bernie Sanders' race to the White House. All right. So we come in here and notice Hillary stopped him, but if we keep going and we do it well enough, if we get all the way there, he's made it to the White House. All right. We're going to build that. We're going to build it very incrementally. And the graphics aren't, the graphics aren't great or anything, but it'll allow us to go through some registering event listeners, and it'll allow us to do some collision detection and a few other things. All right. And I mean, we could change this as an example. If you wanted to add this to your Uber site, this could be a car, and these could be pedestrians or something else, whatever you wanted it to be. All right, so there's a lot of different stuff that you could do with that. And it's a work in progress, but it's not bad as it is. And we're going to work on that next week. All right, and we're going to build it very incrementally. It'll take at least 2 class periods to do it. All right, but I'm going to ask that you work along with me as we do this because I really think that you'll get something out of doing that. And that basically will suffice for your next assignment. All right, then we're going to jump into the next part, which is chapters 12 through 15, I believe it is, something like that. And that's very, very jQuery heavy. All right, it's almost total jQuery. And as it says, we'll talk about user interaction with jQuery animation, jQuery for forms, advanced page elements with jQuery. So 14 and 15 go into using Ajax. All right. Then we'll go into part 4, which is using the jQuery user interface, which is some extra stuff that you can add. All right. I'm not, again, we will actually get into the last part of the book. I'm not sure if we'll be able to actually have an assignment on this with the Angular stuff, but I at least want to go through it and go through some of the major points in there. All right, or what I consider to be the major points. All right, so again, for today, I got asked the question, is there going to be any lab in any class today? If there is, it'll probably be in this one because it probably won't take, if we get through this whole thing in an hour, then the second hour's lab. All right. I will tell you for the other 2 classes, because just about everybody, if not everybody, is in the other 2, what we're going to do in Android today is we're going to go over about chapters 10 through 20. And it's a lot to do, but we're going to do that. And then in the iOS class, we're going to go through about chapters 10 through 24. All right, so we've got a lot of stuff to do. That's the bad news, or if you'd call it that. The good news is your next two programs aren't going to be hard. I just want you to again, start going through and keep going through these fundamentals. So if you're following along, I'm on page 235, Chapter 9, Applying JavaScript and jQuery Events for Richly Interactive Web Pages. As I had done previously, if you do go out to the P drive for the site, you don't have to do it for the class. You don't have to do it right now. But what you're going to find if you do that is, again, there are 4 tables in here with about 60 examples. And I pull those examples from api.jquery.com, from W3 Schools, and from a few other places. So for instance, the first one talks about all this stuff. All right. So if I go to ScreenX, for example, and I run this, you can kind of see the stuff that it will do. All right. So that's all in there if you want to take advantage of it. So there's what? 23, 29, 56, 62 examples. So you can't say you're hurting for examples. All right. And just so you know, the ones are already out there for Thursday. I've got the stuff for Chapter 10 out there and the stuff for Chapter 11 out there as well. So that's all out there. All right. As it says, one of the major goals of AngularJS, jQuery, and JavaScript is to go and allow interactivity in a web page. That's what we're shooting for. Again, how do you get users to visit your web page? Have good content. How do you get them to come back again? Have content that changes on a regular basis. And if you can engage the user and have them feel that they're interacting, all the better. All right? So in this chapter particularly, they talk about events. As mentioned here, at the heart of web pages are events. An event, basically look at it this way, for lack of better words, that your web page is sitting there with a bunch of stuff on it waiting for the user to interact with it. It might be filling out a form and clicking a button. It might be just inputting stuff into a form. It might be doing all sorts of different things. So your web page is sitting there in a mode where it's waiting for you to do something. What you'll do will be an event. It wants to handle the event, so that's what they're talking about. All right? And the author goes a little nuts here. It says understanding events, the objects that represent them, etc., will allow you to create some spectacular web or user interaction. So in this lesson, you'll learn the concepts required to understand events and how to utilize them. All right. So they go through there, and the first thing that's shown in here, starting on the bottom of 235, but really on 236 and 237, is they talk about the event process in here. All right. And it says you've already been using events, and you have been. You've been using events in every programming language you've ever had. Typically, what it's been things like, you've got a user interface with a button on it. You might fill in a bunch of stuff in the user interface. You click the button and something happens. You might have, that might be your calculate button. You might have another button that clears the screen and maybe another button that exits the program. All right. I've asked you on that first Uber assignment that you were supposed to basically set it up so that when you posted that you were supposed to be going to that PHP page. Well, how'd you do that? You clicked the button when you submitted the form, right? So it's something that you've been doing all along. So they describe the event handling process here in the steps that are shown, the 5 steps shown on page 236. All right? And as it says there, step 1, something happens. A physical event occurs. That might be something that you do as a user, but it also might be something that you don't do. It might be something where you've set some kind of a timer, where if the user has been on a page for maybe X number of minutes, maybe it's an e-commerce site and they haven't done anything and you want them to feel engaged. You might have a message that comes up that says, hey, just so you know, if you buy today, shipping is free, type of thing. That's interaction. All right? So some physical event happens. Based on that event or events, as it says, something gets triggered in the browser. As mentioned, oftentimes multiple events at the same time. For example, every time I key in a key on the keyboard, 3 events happen. Key pressed, all right? As I'm starting to press, key down when it's down all the way. When I let go, a key up event. You can have code that goes and does things for each one of those. And I mean, let's look at it. Let's be really critical here. Think about it. If you were to put code in a key down type of event, and you had a field where you asked the user how much money they made, okay? And you decided that it had to be positive. That was it. It had to be a number and it had to be positive. Boom, that was it. So if they started with a 0, you could not even allow the input to go through. If they put any non-numeric input in, you could not allow it to go through. That's the ultimate in input validation. Literally setting it up so that the user right from the get-go can't put any junk in to begin with. All right, so as it says, the browser creates an object, a separate object for each event that's triggered. Why? Because it's possible for you to put code in each one of those events. All right, then user event handlers are called. But it's the same kind of thing. You may or may not be aware of this, but back in the days, if you remember, back in the C# class, all right, almost always, in just about every program we created from the beginning, we created a user interface, and we had usually 3 buttons on it: calculate, clear, and exit. All right, and the idea was, with the calculate, the clear, the exit, all of those corresponded to what event? What do you have to do to make something happen? Click event. But whether you knew it or not, they all had a double click event. But nothing happened when you double clicked on them, bless you. Nothing happened when you double clicked on them. Why? Because we didn't put any code in there for it. All right? So as it says, the user handlers are called, but if there is no associated code, nothing will happen. All right? So it's up to you to make something happen. So there are 3 phases, as it says, that event handlers can be acting in. And they're shown right here in the picture. So let's just leave the picture up here. It's nice and big. The first one is the capturing phase. All right? And as it says in the book here, the capturing phase is on the way down to the target element from the document directly. So you're moving that way. All right? What does that mean? That means that if on a web page, all right, if on a web page, on my web page, I've got a body, and in the body, I've got, let's say, a paragraph, and in that paragraph, I put an unordered list, and in that unordered list, I've got a list item. You know how to do that. That's pretty simple stuff. When you're capturing, the first thing that happens is it checks at the HTML level. Then it checks at the body level. Then it checks at the paragraph level. Then it checks at the UL level. Then it checks at the LI level. Does that make sense? So it works from the top down. Bubbling goes the other way. It works from the bottom up. So it starts at the LI level, goes up to the UL level, goes up to the paragraph level, goes up to the body level, goes up to the HTML level. So they mention that here. They kind of compare and contrast capturing and bubbling on the bottom of page 236. And then based on what code you put in, all right, the browser handlers are called. So this, they have a lot of again, there are quite a few tables in this chapter. And what they show in here are some of the JavaScript and jQuery event object attributes. I'm not going to go through any of them. They're all explained in here. I've gone through every one of these, and you have an example. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. There's at least a few of the examples in there that don't work. They required some other files and stuff, but you should be able to get the idea as far as what's going on. All right? And you notice there's anything from, you can work with the screen. You can work with timestamps. You can do all sorts of different things in here. All right? These things that are in here, the first things that are shown, they're event attributes that you're working with. All right? but there's also some methods. And you notice that the major ones are shown right here. All right. Notice, is default prevented? Well, think about what a default means. For instance, if I click a hyperlink, the default is for me, the system, to try to figure out what that hyperlink reference is and try to go to it, right? Make that my new page. All right. I can keep that from happening if I want to. All right. When stuff is bubbling up, or it's being captured down, what that is referred to as the event is propagating. So it's either propagating up or it's propagating down. You can have the propagating stopped on this. Maybe you get to a certain point where you don't want it to go on and check anything anymore. So you can call, for example, stop propagation. All right. And when it does this, notice that you can do it or you can tell it to do it immediately. All right. And what happens is, typically there's a whole bunch of stuff that is going to happen automatically based on these different browser events. If you say stop propagation, what it does is it's queued up a bunch of stuff and it runs through the queue and then it stops. But if you tell it to stop immediate propagation, it tries to stop as soon as it possibly can. All right. Some of the event types, again, these are things that are in here. This is the table that's on pages 240 and 241. All right. Most of the stuff that's in here should make sense to you. All right. There's an abort where you can stop something from happening. And most often, as mentioned right there, it's equated with, you might have an image that, it might be a very intricate image, or it might be on a phone or whatever. And, especially it might check your media and it might say, oh, it's a phone. Just abort that. Don't even put that image in there. It's too big, it's too intricate, it's going to take up too much memory, etc. You know what blur is when you go from one form element to another one. All right? So if I'm in a first name element and I tab off of that into my last name element, there's two things that happen. A blur happens, all right, when I lose focus from the first name to the last name, and then a focus happens when I go from the first name to the last name. All right? Change event, as it says, the different type of input elements when something changes in there. Click event and up double click event, we're all familiar with. Error events. So if something doesn't happen, do you want to take control or do you want to let the system take control? The advantage of you taking control is you can determine what happens next. If you let the system take control, the system's going to determine what happens next. That may or may not be what you want to have happen. All right. So notice that not only is there a focus, but there's a focus in. As it says, different from the focus type in that it supports bubbling up to the parents. All right. And there's focus out when you're either getting the focus or you're losing the focus. The different keyboard events that we already talked about. The load event. All right. We may have even done something like that back in the 119 class, real crude stuff, when you say body in the body tag and you put on load equals and you put something. And what that can do is, as soon as the web page is loaded, you can call it, some kind of a JavaScript or jQuery function. Different things with a mouse. You notice there's 6 or 7 of them. Pressing the mouse down, moving the mouse, mousing over something, mousing out of something, mousing up, enter and leaving. What you're going to notice on a bunch of those things, just so you see this, it's not that one. For instance, on the mouse enter, a lot of them look like this. You take your mouse, notice what's happening. All right? Just to show you what happens. And these get a little bit more. This is one of the last ones, but most of the, some of them keep count. Some of them tell you exactly what your mouse position is, etc. All right? Resetting, resizing things, working with scroll bars, selecting something, triggered when a form is submitted. You know what that is. If something loads, it also unloads, type of thing. All right. So again, they talk about using the JavaScript onload event. This is what I mentioned before. Quite often you see code that's like this. All right. Onload equals some kind of a handler. But sometimes you see it like this too. They basically both do the same thing. All right. Talk a little bit more about document.ready. If you haven't been reading the book, especially take notice of the stuff that's in chapters 12 through about 19 because they're so jQuery centric. 1 to 6 should have been review. This stuff, you're not going to remember this because if there's 60 different properties and methods, you're not going to remember all of them. But part of the thing is knowing where to look, saying, oh yeah, he showed us an example of that type of an idea. But as I told the class yesterday, the other class that's using the same book, on your next assignments, I'm not going to say, okay, go over to table 9.3. There's 26 items in there. Use 5 of them. That would be dumb to do that. I'm not going to do that. But I will say something like, make sure you implement, and I'll give you a few things that you are to implement. That'll be in your next assignment. All right. This, again, when you look at this right there, all right, that should make sense to you. That line of code that's in blue. It's an event handler, and what it does is it changes the text of all paragraphs to the word clicked. It's like using inner HTML with JavaScript. When you use the .html method here, all right, with jQuery, basically what you're doing is you're either adding or you're modifying text. And that's what we're doing right there. This is where it gets, for lack of better words, on page 243, this is where it starts to get more complex. Assigning event handlers in HTML. It says the most basic methods of adding an event handler is directly in the HTML code. The advantage of this is it's fairly simple and it's fairly straightforward to do it. All right. So it says the following shows how to add a click handler to a DOM element in HTML code. And you've seen stuff like this before. All right. As it says, this would call the following function when any div is clicked right here. And they're just giving a simple example. You could make it do anything you wanted it to do. But again, what I'm shooting for is eventually with this site that we're doing in here, this BTC Uber site, is that it will be interactive. If you haven't guessed it already, one of the things that you're going to do, not in the next assignment, but probably the one after that, is on the home page, you're going to have a slideshow in there. All right. I don't care where you get the information from, but it should look. Part of what you're going to be graded on is how professional it looks. So in other words, I don't want you to use clip art. Okay. And it's amazing the number of instructors I see around here. I don't know if you remember, but one of the first things to have clip art was the old Word Perfect clip art, which kind of morphed into Word clip art, and it's some really ugly stuff. It's amazing all the stuff I see upstairs of the people who are in the business division who still use that rotten garbage. All right. You can also define specific arguments that get passed to an event. All right. So the example that's in here, that what I don't like is the examples aren't that good. Okay. So this will call this function, but it will pass it what? 1, 2, 3, 4 different parameters into it. All right. Now, some people like doing it that way. Other people like to add event handlers in JavaScript. The advantage of adding event handlers in JavaScript is you can do it in a much more dynamic, interactive type of way. All right. So as it says, you can add listeners after the page is loaded, but with HTML, you put it in there and you just wait for the thing to happen. All right. So it's set up. So to add that, as it says, you call add event listener on the DOM object. Okay. Kind of ugly stuff, but you have to start learning how to read this stuff that's in here. So you've got this thing here. It says, the trick with using an add event listener is to pass custom data into the handler call. One method is to wrap the actual function inside of a simpler wrapper and then pass it. So they show an example right here. All right. Document.getElement by ID. Well, what are we doing? This says when you get the ID that's called div1, add a listener to it. So when you click that, all right, you'll end up passing these 1, 2, 3, 4 bits of information from it or to it, and it'll do this stuff. So basically, it'll tell you the position of the div at that moment in time. And the false right here really means there's not going to be a callback function. So when you're all done, you're all done. You're not going to do any more. If you didn't like my explanation, it's right there. Now, if you read that, you might say, well, that's better than the one you gave. Okay. All right. I would strongly suggest that you go over the exercises that are in here. The first one is on pages 245, 246, 247, and 248. As it says, in this example, you attach event listeners to DOM objects dynamically using the JavaScript method. So the code to do that, this is what it looks like. But the code to do that, here's your HTML. There's nothing hard there. This says right there, when you load this, you're going to call onLoadHandler. So you're going to be calling some kind of a JavaScript function. And then we've got what? Some divs, okay, and an H1. But if you look at what's here, all right, so this is saying call the onLoadHandler. There's the onLoadHandler right there. Okay, so what are we doing? We're grabbing the div1 and we're grabbing the div2. We're associating with each one of those a click routine. One of them is associating the function that's called yesWrapper, so it'll do this one. The other one is associating the function noWrapper, so it's going to do this one. Basically what it's going to do, I believe, is if you press this, it's going to say the div says yes at X position, and if you press this, it'll say the div says no position. So the example itself is contrived. It's kind of dumb, but it's the code that goes along with it that's more important. You can also apply event handlers as mentioned starting on the bottom of page 248 in jQuery. All right, and the author mentions here that that's the best way of doing it. Well, that's in the author's humble opinion. That's the best way of doing it. And I'm not going to say it is or it is not. It says using jQuery objects makes it simple to select different sets of objects and apply the same event handler to all of them. How do you do that? Well, if you remember, we talked in the last lecture, we talked about using the each method in jQuery and using the map method in jQuery. And I said with both of those, it allows you to iterate through stuff that's on a page and take every single thing that meets your criteria and call a function or something on it. So they show some examples of that right here. So here is the way it looks syntactically, and then they describe each of the components, events, one or more space-separated event types and optional namespaces. One word, I'm not sure if we talked about this or not, namespaces became kind of a big thing when years ago, when the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, decided there would be no more new HTML. Well, you see how well that worked. But they decided there'd be no more new HTML. Instead, we'd have XML, okay? The extensible markup language where you make your own tags, okay? The problem with that is since you make your own tags, imagine that I'm a carpenter, all right? And I'm talking with Juan. She runs a store. So I sit there and I make my own tags. Well, I'm going to create a table. So I call my tag table. Wouldn't that make sense? I can do that. But what about the HTML tag that's called table? That's where you can run into a lot of problems. So when you namespace, you typically go, and when you're creating your own stuff, you put it in a file, and at the beginning of it, you put a namespace statement in there. And then you're able to namespace, and instead of me saying table, I might say something like jscott.table. And that would mean, in that case, that I'm using a table with 4 legs on it. Whereas if I use just a regular table, that means I'm using an HTML table tag. All right. And the reason that you use namespaces is that when you have enough different people working on the same project, the chances are very good that 2 people are going to use the same name for something they really shouldn't use the same name for. So namespaces are a way around that. There's other ways, but they're a way around that. All right. They talk about a mapping object. Again, we looked at the maps last time, but the next example that's here, that's on pages 250, 251, and 252, here's a surprise. It's the same program, but previously they did that program using JavaScript event handlers. Now they're doing it, and they're using jQuery event handlers. The code looks a lot cleaner when you take a look at it. All right? Okay. Page 253, using jQuery event helper functions to assign event handlers. As mentioned right there, jQuery also provides helper functions for you to work with this stuff. Anytime you see helper function, what that means, for lack of better words, basically it's an alias. So rather than you having to go write some really long-winded, hairy function, what they've done in the jQuery file is they've taken it and aliased it and given it a simpler name. And what happens when you call that is it goes back into the jQuery file itself, and it looks through it and says, oh, that's an alias for this. Do this. And that's pretty much what's going on in there. And they give some examples, okay? It says jQuery provides one additional helper function that's useful for working with mice, for example. Okay? If I'm sitting there and I'm doing this, so if I take my mouse and I'm doing this, I'm doing a mouse over. Would you all agree with that? Now when I click over here, I did a mouse out. Okay? So what you see with jQuery is, for instance, I might take my mouse and I might set it up when I put it, maybe this is a box right here. If I put my mouse over that box, it turns black. And if I move out, it turns white again. Get the idea? All right. And I can do that, and I can write code for both a mouse over and a mouse out. Or I can just write it for a hover, which is basically going to do both. So when I'm over it, I'm hovering over it, it'll do one thing. When I hover back again, it'll do something else. And again, you're going to see this over and over again when we talk more jQuery specific stuff in the later chapters. All right, both jQuery and JavaScript, as mentioned right there, allow you to trigger events manually. All right, notice it says provides advantages such as simulating user interactions, typing page interactions together, or interactions with your own custom events. So what they're saying in there is you can write code that maybe you don't want something to happen automatically. All right, for instance, let's say that whenever you come to my site, I decide what your favorite color is, and I'm going to make the background color of the site that color. All right, that's not interactive. All right, but I might provide a drop-down list so that when you come to the site, I show you 5 colors, and I ask you to choose one you'd like to use for your background color. All right, so Zane comes in there and he chooses blue. Well, I shouldn't do anything until he's made a choice. And that's the kind of thing that they're talking about in here. All right. So as it says, the simplest way to trigger an event in JavaScript is to use the event method attached to the DOM object if there is one. All right. Simple events, click, select, blur, focus. They all have corresponding method DOM objects that support them. So as it says, you can trigger a click event by this. The more advanced method, as it says, is to create a document.dispatch event. There's a lot of work in that. All right, it says if you want to do that, you can. The advantage is you've got more control. The disadvantage is you write more code, so it's harder. And they mention here it's a 3-step process. The first step is to create an event object using the document.createEvent method. All right, so they give you an example right here of how you could do that. And they give you some examples of different events. The second step, it says here, and if you are looking, this is down at the bottom, right around page 255. It says the next step is to initialize the event object with values by calling the event's initialization function. All right, and they give you an example of that. And the final step then is to call the dispatch event. So again, if you want the most control over it, you're going to do it like this. If you want some control over it, you're going to do it more like this. So the next one that's in here on 255, 256, 257, and 258, it says here, triggering events manually using JavaScript. All right, so in this example, you step through the process of using an event handler from a span to trigger a click event on a different element. The result is you can click the span to select or deselect a checkbox. Let's take a look at the actual code for that, which is in here someplace. All right, we're used to doing this, but now notice we're doing the same thing using buttons. Again, is that important a thing? All right, well, it depends. You know, especially if you're an older person, having big buttons like that might make it a lot easier for them to go through. All right, you know you're getting old, at least I do, when my wife comes up to me yesterday and asks me if I want to join AARP. All right.
Sent it to you.
They did. They sent it to her. She said, we can both join. I was like, I don't even want to think about that. So all we're doing is we're setting it up so you can use either the checkbox or the button to do the same thing. But for the button to understand that when you click this, it's supposed to turn that I'm available on or off, it has to be wired up. And that's what they're doing in here. If you don't like doing it with JavaScript, you can do it with jQuery. So again, they come through here, and this isn't the same example. I don't really like this one, but this is the one that they used. This was the cards one. I can't remember what it's called, though. It's card suits. I don't see card suits. And there it is. Okay. And I'm not sure exactly. I wish they would have gone through and done the same one that they did here, but done it with jQuery. All right. And no one here has asked me this directly, but what a couple of the first year students have said, you know, I understand the assignment. I understand what we're supposed to be doing. But can I ask you a question? Yeah. All right. Why are you making us create a form that does validation in 3 different ways? And again, the answer is because if you're a web developer, and especially if you are maintaining existing code, you have no guarantee that where you're doing it, that it's good. They're going to be using HTML5. They may be doing no validation, and it might show. They may be doing HTML5 validation, but on older browsers, it doesn't work. They may be doing JavaScript validation. They may be doing jQuery validation. So yeah, by having you combine a lot of this stuff, you're using the same logic, but what you're seeing is, and what's different is the syntax, basically. And you've got to do that because that's how it is out there. Yes?
They may be doing all of them because they don't have time to go back and fix sites that they built under older techniques.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
And that's true. I mean, and I was talking to the class yesterday, and I told them, and maybe I've told you this before, but I still remember the first thing I was asked to do at Bell Labs is they gave me a section of code. They wanted me to learn C. And they said, this is some code. It's pretty much antiquated. It's not used very often. It was for older phone features, and it was a few hundred lines, but it had bugs in it. And they wanted me to find the bugs and fix the bugs. And I did that. It wasn't that easy, not knowing the language, but I did it, okay? And when I got done, there were no errors, but there were like 50 warnings. So I showed that to my boss. I showed him a copy of the printout, and I said, do you want me to fix the warnings too? And he goes, no. And I said, why not? He said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. He said, you fixed it to the point where it works. You know, and there are some places that look at warnings as being bugs that are kind of in hiding. And there are other places that if you went through and you ran, you know, I did this one day, and I haven't done it lately, but this is a couple years ago. I ran the BTC, their main webpage. I ran that through the HTML validator.
That's bad.
After about 17 or 18 pages of errors, I just gave up. And there were warnings just up the wazoo. But again, you will be doing some of this stuff that I ask you to do. You will be doing it using JavaScript, or you'll be doing it using jQuery, or as Mike said, it could be very well a hybrid, where you know, back in the olden days, like maybe 10 years ago, you were using JavaScript for everything. But now you're using jQuery, but there's still a lot of JavaScript out there, and it works. And to make it even worse, if you're trying to support older versions of IE, the way they do this propagation and a lot of this other stuff is different than the way everybody else does it. Why? Because again, Microsoft basically in the past has always taken that attitude, well, we're going to be the dog and you're going to be the tail. All right, we're going to come up with everything, and then you're going to say, oh, that sounds good. And after a while, the W3 after a while the W3C said basically, no, we're not going to do that. So over time, Microsoft has kind of capitulated, and they're trying to be like every other browser. All right. So as it says, now that you've had a chance to trigger events with JavaScript, you can understand how much easier jQuery will make your life. All right. It says the following statement triggers a click event for all spans. That should make sense to you. What if I didn't want to generate a click event for all spans? What if I only wanted it for a certain span? What would I have to do then? Put an ID in it for that span. And then I have to put a pound sign before that S. Right there. Then I could do with it whatever I wanted to. All right. The examples that he gives in here, there's nothing wrong with them other than the fact that they're so general, you're not typically going to do that. You're not typically going to sit there and set a selector for every paragraph on a website so that when you click it, it says hello world. That'd just be stupid. All right. And they give some other examples of things that you can do here. Okay. So what are we doing here? It says following is using the first method, the one that's up here, to trigger a click event for all elements with a class of checkbox. All right. Class of checkbox. So anything with a checkbox, trigger what? Trigger a click event. All right. And then they show another example where you've got more parameters. Okay. So as it says, the result of this here is this is the one that I just showed you with the card suits. Okay. I like the chapter. I don't like most of the examples that he put in here. All right, on page 262, we're just about finished, so it'll be probably closer to 11, but then we'll be done. As it says, an extremely powerful aspect of the JavaScript and jQuery event handling mechanism is the ability to add custom events. What does that mean? It means they're not, quote, natural events, unquote. They're events that you cause to happen. You're customizing them. All right. So either it's a regular event that you want something special to happen, or it might be something that, again, I give the real old example before all of your times. But it used to be that for example, I remember before Word, when you used WordPerfect, if you didn't save your document by default every 15 minutes, you'd see a message on the bottom of the screen that would say, document saved. They set up an event that was based on a timer that said, if you haven't saved in 15 minutes, I'm saving for you. Now, you could disable that, or you could set it up so it literally saved every minute on the minute if you wanted to do that. But most people just kept the default in there. All right? So the advantage, as it says, of creating custom events is you can customize them, you can add them, remove them, bubble them up, trigger them, so you can do them both in JavaScript. So what are we doing here? Well, as it says, let's take a look at what's here. The first parameter, as it says, defines a type name. All right? The second is going to basically, it's going to set a bunch of stuff up. What we're doing here, whether you realize it or not, is we're creating a JavaScript object. And you never really did any code in the beginning JavaScript class, not really, other than arrays, where we really worked much with objects, until really the end of the class where we talked a little bit of JSON. So what we're going to do in this, wherever it is, I don't know if I probably don't have it up anymore, but that game that we're going to write is we're going to create a Hillary object, we're going to create a Bernie object. All right? And we're just going to set them up like that, just so you can see indeed how that kind of stuff is done. Yes? Well, let's put it this way. I'll say yes and no. And enum and C, what an enum does is it allows you to create a new data type where you put your own values in there. But basically those values, they're all integer related. All right? In here, the idea is the same in that we're creating our own thing, but this isn't based at all on anything integer. All right? So I can sit there and just create a new object and start adding stuff to it, whatever I want. Again, you can do it both in JavaScript and you can do it in jQuery. Typically, again, the reason that you're going to do it in jQuery is typically it's going to result in you writing less code. All right? Finally, the last thing that's discussed in this chapter are callbacks. If you've never heard of a callback, many routines that you write in jQuery, let's see if we can find one here. I don't know if this is a great example or not, but this deferred object done, okay? So we've got this thing in here where we're writing this function that does this, okay? When you have a callback, what you're saying is you're able to, on your own function that you write, you can add another parameter to it. And what that is that parameter says, when you're done with this function, call this function. Does that make sense? All right. I mean, you can start to see some of the reasons you might want to do that. So if I was, I don't know, maybe I was going to ask how much money you make, okay? And just assume that if you get into a certain website, the first thing I'm going to ask, maybe it's some kind of a financial website, and I ask, how much money do you make? And Juan puts in there $250,000 a year. Well, now she goes to our deluxe page, all right, where Ben says I make $10,000 a year. He doesn't go to the deluxe page. And I could do that as an example with callbacks. Sometimes a callback is something as simple as when a routine ends up finishing, you might have an alert that comes up on the screen that says routine is finished. That's done through a callback. All right? So when you work with callbacks, there's different ways or different things that you can do with them. I'm not going to go through this right now. You're going to see some of this as we go on. All right? And going along with that, there's also a thing called deferred objects. Notice here, a deferred object is an object that contains a set of functions to be run at a later time. So you define all this stuff, but you say, I don't want you to run until something magical happens, whatever that happens to be. So you define all these things, and then you define them basically as being a deferred object will hold all of these functions. And then it might be, you know, after you submit this, after you do this, after I check for this, whatever. All right, then you run it. So as it says, the lesson talked about event handling. That's what this whole thing was about. I'd strongly suggest if you really want to get a handle on it, take a read. It's not the easiest chapter in the world to read. It's well written. Not all the examples are great, but it is well written. All right. What we should be able to do on Thursday is to go over chapter 10, which is relatively short, and chapter 11 in the same period. All right. So it is now 10:53. The rest of the time in here today, in this class at least, is yours. If you think, well, gee, I don't have anything to do, I'd be surprised. But if you thought that, then what you might want to do is at least page through chapters 10 through 20 in the Android book and chapters 10 through about 24 in the iOS book. All right, because everybody who's in here, even Luke now, should have PDFs of both those books. And if for some reason you don't have PDFs of the books, let me know, and I'll get you PDFs of the books. All right.